Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast with your host, Andrew Langer.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Lunch Hour with Federal Newswire. I am your host, Andrew Langer. So glad you can join us today. And if you're watching us on YouTube, go and check us out on one of the many fine podcast platforms at which you can find the audio version of the Lunch Hour. If you're listening to us on one of those fine podcast platforms, you can check out what's happening in the studio by visiting our YouTube channel. We've got a brand new platform on X at Lunch Hour Pod. Follow us there, leave a like, leave a subscribe, leave a comment, and let your friends and family members' friends know how much you are enjoying the Lunch Hour. Very excited to bring our guest on. Her name is Dr. Carolyn Bourdeaux. She is the executive director of the Concord Coalition and the Concord Coalition Action Fund, where she is building a grassroots movement to advocate for fiscal responsibility, including working to balance the federal budget and cut the $36 trillion national debt. Holy cow. Dr. Bourdeaux served as a Democratic member of Congress from Georgia from 2021 to 2022. During her time in Congress, she worked with the Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus and served as co-chair of the Blue Dog Coalition Task Force on Fiscal Responsibility and Government Reform. She led bipartisan efforts to advance solutions to our nation's fiscal challenges through responsible budgeting reform and requiring Congress to pay for programs. She also led policy work on healthcare, small business, and infrastructure. She is a contributing columnist to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and a senior visiting scholar at the University of Georgia. She, prior to entering politics, she was an associate professor of public management and policy at Georgia State University. Dr. Bourdeaux, let's start here. $36 trillion in debt. We're apparently adding another $2 trillion every year these days. Obviously, that's how you get there is by having a deficit of $2 trillion in your annual budget. But how did we get here? And am I right in saying that we have accelerated in recent years the growing of the national debt?
Yes. Well, very good to be visiting with you on this show. We actually, the Concord Coalition has its roots back in the 1990s, and that was a time when there was a big effort to try to balance the budget, and we did actually get it balanced. So around 2000, remarkably, our revenue lines and our expenditure line touched one another, and we were actually generating a surplus. How amazing was that? And then everybody was like, "Oh, the problem is done. We don't have to worry about this anymore." And just kind of they lost the vision. So over the past 25 years, through a variety of administrations, right? Both parties really participated in this. We have seen increasing expenditures that are being driven by Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. So our what we might refer to as entitlement spending has been growing. Our population has been aging, and the healthcare costs have been going up. So those things have just been growing and growing. And then we have not paid for that. We have been cutting taxes, which we all love. I love, a good tax cut too, like everybody else. But we just haven't been paying for what really are the retirement benefits for the nation. And now we're in a tough spot.
My policy area of expertise is the regulatory state. And as the regulatory state grows, that has an impact on all of this as well. It all conspires to create this massive cocktail. I had a conversation. I was at a conference this past weekend, had a conversation with a physician who's very interested in dealing with some very specific aspects of Medicare and Medicaid spending having to do with chronic kidney disease and dialysis. It's one of these things where you have to take a look at what is driving these cost figures and recognize the reality. In fact, let me get to that because there are two things, right? There's policy that's made in a crisis. We'll get to that in a second. But there's also, an aphorism that I like to use, and I want to get your thoughts about this, that the most well-intentioned policies eventually bump up against very real realities. Or as my father simplified it for me, he said, Andrew, that's too complicated. He said, Andrew, there are many roads to utopia. However, all must traverse the surface of the earth. Talk about this issue of intention policies bumping up against reality.
Well, I'm sure you can talk a lot about regulatory context, right, things like that, and different ways of cost savings.
but in the
It
context
just
of the Concord Coalition, the work that you're doing and the work you were doing in Congress, talk about it in those contexts.
Well, I think I think of it in terms of an honest conversation with people about what
Right.
exactly we're doing with these different programs and what it is we want to accomplish over the long term. Um, and there are a lot of ways that we can save money within programs like Medicare and Medicaid that does not hurt beneficiaries, but does demand more efficiency from the various providers that provide us with these different services. But there are trade-offs when we demand that kind of efficiency, right? They make less profit. They maybe have less money for research. So there are always trade-offs. I like your idea that there's always things get distorted as you actually try to implement them in real life. But another one of my favorite sayings, it comes from my economist friends, that there is no free lunch. There are always trade-offs. And really one of the problems we see with how Congress confronts the budget right now is they're not willing to have an honest discussion about the trade-offs.
Is some of this, I mean, good colleague of mine here at the Federal Newswire, Jerry Rogers, he edits Real Clear Policy. His big thing is the return to regular order. I mean, we've gotten away from that. How does that play into all this?
Oh, well, that, of course, is something near and dear to my heart.
Sure.
So I come out of the state, right? I was director of Georgia's Senate Budget and Evaluation Office back during the Great Recession. I helped the state of Georgia balance the budget. Actually, I was nonpartisan staff, but worked predominantly with the Republican leadership in the legislature to get them there. And one of the things I observed was a legislature that actually balanced the budget. And we have completely lost faith that Congress can actually do its job. And we need to get back to a world where Congress does the work that is laid out for it in the U.S. Constitution, which is to say it proposes a budget, it enacts it prior to the beginning of the fiscal year, and then proceeds to audit and evaluate how that works. And I'm often in agreement with my Republican colleagues that we need to move away from undue reliance on executive actions, which can be reversed, and often are done without sort of that deliberative process that is important. But yes, I am all in. Congress needs to actually do its job, and we need to really get back to a place where it is passing budgets on time and on target.
And let's talk about the crisis-driven policy. I've had a conversation again over the weekend with an Uber driver of all people. One of my North Stars in public policy.
I love conversations with Uber drivers.
Right? But I one of my North Stars in public policy read a Supreme Court case, 1990s. I was working for a blind lawyer. In fact, we've had him on the show. His name is Roger Marzullo. And in this 1992 case, New York versus United States, Justice O'Connor wrote, "The Constitution protects us from our best intentions. It divides power among sovereigns and among branches of government precisely so that we might resist the temptation to concentrate power in one location as the expedient solution to the crisis of the day." And to me, it's all summed up in there, right? Which is this idea that we have a government that is supposed to be deliberative in nature. We're supposed to think deeply about policies because, A, if we make mistakes, they're really hard to undo. And B, once you implement a policy, that's really hard to undo. Talk about that, about this issue of deliberation within the context of that.
So everybody needs to realize that pretty much every state in this country goes through regular order when they pass budgets. Now, there are a few troublemakers out there, right?
Of course.
I won't name names, but some are not able to do it. But the vast majority of states, the vast majority of our local governments, our school districts, we have a lot of governments who do this systematically through a legislative process under a lot of pressure, often under a lot of political pressure. But they get the job done. The Georgia legislature, it comes in January. It meets for 3 months. And during that period of time, it passes the budget. The fiscal year starts on July 1st.
Yeah.
It's done well before the beginning of the fiscal year. The governor proposes the budget. The governor says, this is what the revenues are. There may be some debate over that. Then they go line by line through the budget. I've sat there while they've done it. with a 20% decline where they had to reduce the revenues at the time around might reduce the expenditures and revenues, fill a hole of 20%. And they did it. You can knuckle down and do it. You can do it through a legislative process. And when you do it through that legislative process, you're getting input from across the community as you go through that. And that it doesn't avoid all mistakes, but it certainly reduces the likelihood of making serious mistakes.
Well, why is it, do you think, that state legislatures have, is it because they absolutely have to? I guess the question is that they're able to make those compromises, and yet Congress is unable to. One of my favorite theories is that part of it is the problem of the hot take and the role that social media plays in driving this. But how do you see it? What's the fundamental difference here?
To some degree, it's driven by balanced budget requirements, right? Now, the thing people don't understand, and I kind of hate to say this on air and have people hear this, is that those balanced budget requirements aren't as hard and fast as people think they are. So one of the challenges is at the federal level, they're like, oh, well, the federal government needs to be able to deficit spend, and therefore we can't have some kind of balanced budget requirement. But states also, they have ways of moving around that. It's much more flexible than people realize.
Sure.
But what it does is it establishes a norm. It establishes a culture. It establishes an expectation that the legislature will come in and will largely bring their operating expenses into alignment with the revenues, right? And that will include interest on debt and things like that. And they are checked through a number of metrics. And also, of course, bond rating agencies are out there evaluating them. And so you just have this entire apparatus built around pushing towards balance, requiring them to make trade-offs. And that is all lost at the federal level right now.
Right. But, you talked about this issue, or in your bio, it speaks to your time doing, bipartisan, work through the Problem Solvers Caucus. Obviously, we know that there are folks who take a great deal of skepticism, shall we say, of those kinds of efforts. And again, you may not want to, you're doing substantive, work here. So I'm not asking you to sort of trash the process. I want to be really clear about that. But at least, why do you think that there is this inherent skepticism? Why does this system now reward people retreating into their corners and not finding solutions, as opposed to a cooperative approach at the end of the day?
Well, I think in part, elected officials need to know that they are rewarded for working in a bipartisan way, and not rewarded for being, super partisan and not solving problems. And one of the things I found, of course, I was a frontliner. I was in one of the most difficult districts in the country, and you got to decide where you stand in this world too. You just have to have to make some commitments and choices. And I early on was like, I believe in bipartisanship. I have worked with Republicans. I don't think they're evil people, right? Which is unfortunately part of how the parties now approach each other often. And I would go talk to my constituents about working with problem solvers, working in a bipartisan way. And they loved it. And I remember one of them, during one town hall, somebody raised their hand and they were like, forgive me for asking this question, but why are problem solvers their own little caucus? Shouldn't that be all of Congress? And I was like, that's a good question. That's true.
The conference that I was at over the weekend, for whatever reason, I don't know if they were expecting protesters or whatever, but there was a First Amendment area, and a number of the attendees were like, wait a minute, aren't all 50 states the First Amendment area? So there was genuine confusion there, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. So at any rate, I just think, I saw a lot of political reward in that. Ultimately, if redistricting eventually took me down, but that there was a lot of reward in being moderate, being pragmatic, and actually caring about fiscal issues. I think that's something that people don't realize is very, very important for that pragmatic center as an issue. Right. And, people say, oh, well, we're very, very partisan. There's no way out of it. But if both parties look at their popularity right now, it's not great. It's not great. Right. There's a lot of room to be better. And I would suggest that really having an honest conversation about fiscal issues is a great way to recapture the center. And I pose that to both sides. Think about that. This is a good way to show that you are pragmatic, you're a problem solver, and you're willing to take on the real challenges that face this country.
So let's get into the nitty gritty. What happens, right? Let's assume for a moment that things go on the way they have been, and we continue to run, annual $2 trillion deficits. Where do we end up? I mean, what happens in 5, 10, 15, 20 years to the U.S. economy as a result of this?
Right. Well, unfortunately, this is a disease a little bit like diabetes. Right, which is one where you don't know what's gonna, you don't know how it's gonna hit.
Right, you don't know if you're gonna if you're just gonna pass out from the sugars, or if you're gonna lose a limb.
Exactly, yeah. Or go blind, or ultimately, it will destroy you, it will kill you. Right. And so we're in that kind of position where we don't know if this is going to cause hyperinflation, if this is going to be stagflation. We do know that it is a long-term extraordinary risk. It is a drag on our economy. And right now, and I'm sure you've talked about this, we're paying more in interest than we're paying on national defense.
Right.
And why should we care about that? Because what's happening is the debt, the burden of what we are carrying is actually crowding out right now things that we need to be investing in.
100%.
Our defense is starting to fall, to crumble when you compare it to what Ukraine is doing and what Russia is doing and the investments that China is making. We actually really need to rethink and redo our military. We need to rebuild some of that stuff. That is important. But also we need to be investing in research, in infrastructure, in the platform to be a great nation in the years to come. Right. And all of that is being squeezed by these huge payments that we're making on interest at this point.
And when you add such massive amounts, I mean, do you guys have does the Concord Coalition and the Concord Coalition Action Fund, do you guys have a position on the relationship between, debt and GDP, that debt should be, and revenue and GDP? I mean, some folks are talking about what its revenue should be somewhere between 17 and 19% of GDP. Do you guys get into that at all?
No, we want the revenue line to meet the expenditure line. We're really simple. We want the deficit to go to zero. And I think a good place for debt to GDP to be, I know a lot of folks are just for dear God, try to keep it at 100% of GDP. We're so in such a bad situation. If we could just keep it there, that would be great. But other countries, the metric is 60% of GDP, right? And we really should, to be healthy, try to get back to something like that. And that's going to take some discipline and effort. We are not going to have to go bankrupt or impoverish ourselves to do it. But it does require us to get out there and to get in the mix there and make some real choices and decisions.
And then the issue of foreign creditors holding U.S. debt. I mean, but there are national security implications for that down the road. I mean, not that I am concerned about certain nations, cashing in there or calling in their chits. Right. But do you guys get into that as well?
Not so much. That's gone down considerably since that was really front and center. Nonetheless, I think we saw some of that when President Trump was proposing some of these tariffs. Yeah. You saw countries like China, Japan, saying, well, what we can do is just sell the treasuries back, and we can unload those and cause the cost of make it more difficult for you to keep refinancing this debt. So it is a real concern. It is something to think about. But I think the bigger challenge here is it's just an extraordinary drag on our productivity and our ability to compete with countries around the world.
I mean, again, it's all of a mix. I mean, it's the regulatory issues, it's the debt issues, it's obviously the taxation issues. These are all things that conspire, and none of this. I guess the point that I've long made is that none of these things individually should be taken in the vacuum. They all have to be taken together. Sort of, not that I want to call it a holistic approach, but you do have to look at it that way. Let's sort of step back a little bit and talk a little bit how you got involved in this. I mean, did you always know you were going to get involved, or was there a moment where you said, something, this is the issue of great importance to me?
It really always has been an issue of importance to me. And I've tried to figure out where it began. But back in the 90s, I worked in Washington, as the young aide. I took a train from college to
Sure.
Washington. I went door to door to every member of Congress who I had some connection with. And I said, I am your constituent, or my grandmother's your constituent.
Sure.
Hire me. So I always wanted to be involved in public policy. And I ended up actually working for Ron Wyden from Oregon, Democratic senator. And he was very into the sort of the fiscal issues. And so every bill I introduced had to be paid for. They were all bipartisan. And that really sort of shaped a lot of my worldview, which might be counterintuitive to folks who don't think of Democrats as caring about the budget as much. But then I got a PhD in public administration with a focus in public finance. And then I spent 20 years working in state and local finance and working on making sure states had good fiscal policy. And then I ran for Congress. And when I got there, I don't think people understand how mind-boggling it is to move from a state where you balance the budget, where you're just grinding through every dime, to make sure it's, you're placing it in the best possible spot. And then to go to the federal level where it just feels out of control. Not only the process, we talked about regular order, is out of control. There's no sense of trying to reconcile revenues and expenditures at any point. Nothing is passed on time. Nothing is done in any kind of cohesive way. To just the sense of there's no trade-off, right? Oh, we can cut this tax. Oh, we can increase the spending here, and it doesn't matter. We don't have to find an offset for it.
Right.
And so that really kind of reaffirmed my concern about this issue, that we're not going to be able to get it under control without a real serious grassroots push.
Was that the biggest surprise for you, coming from Georgia up to DC or back to DC? Was that the lack of urgency? I mean, I guess some of it shouldn't have been surprising because you'd been a Hill staffer before, but was that also the biggest change between when you were a staffer when you came back as a legislator?
Well, there were lots of shocks. Yeah. I mean, the partisanship, the influence of social media. There are lots of things that have really changed in the way things work. You're rewarded for going viral, right? And for doing things, and to go viral, that rewards, really driving up conflict, making people angry.
The hot take.
And so those are the kind of things that are rewarded.
It used to be, folks, this idea that if you were a junior member of Congress from wherever, you had to go through, proper channels, regular order, if you wanted to get in front of a camera. Now anybody can get in front of a camera and say whatever crazy thing they want. And the crazier, the more it's possibly going to go viral. And that's a problem, isn't it?
It is. It's a huge problem. I was there with Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I have, also I've got stories about her, some moments there where she was actually, it was some of it was staged. I don't know how much of it is usually, but I remember we'd just taken a vote, and I was standing on the House steps, and I hear this person going, "Okay, now 3, 2, 1, go." And it's her staffer filming her on her iPhone. And Marjorie then storms down the steps and starts screaming at some of the Democratic women, Congresswomen. And one of them says, "Oh, this is a great opportunity." She turns to someone and says, "Here, hold my pocketbook." And so she starts screaming back, and this is like the headlines of CNN then, they're going at it, and they're raising millions of dollars off of this. So,
it really is the definition in many cases of kabuki theater, right? I mean, if we think about people caterwauling to each other on a stage. I mean, it really, it becomes that kind of a situation. So, you leave Congress, you go and you find yourself at the Concord Coalition. I mean, this has got to be like the best of all possible worlds, thoughtful, academic, but public policy advocacy. You talk about your joining up with the Concord Coalition as their executive director.
Yeah. Well, I just started a few months ago, and I do love this stuff. I love public policy. I like the politics. I love getting out there though and talking with people, and really trying to think about how to connect what's going on in Washington with everyday concerns and how people see the world, and try to build that connection. I think a lot of the research that's produced here is often very esoteric. To use a esoteric word, is in that way. And so I really want to work on having that conversation with people. And one of the things I found, and I did maybe like 20 town halls in person, in front of people. Yes, they yelled at me. Yes, they were sometimes a little rough, but those were just so helpful in understanding, where people were coming from and how to communicate with people. And so I'm really looking forward to getting back and doing more of those. We just did a kind of budget town hall in downtown Atlanta a couple weekends ago. It was fantastic. And we want to start building out a lot more of those.
Well, there is, they all have their place. Politics, as I talk about it, as the art of getting things elected or passed. Public policy is the art of solving problems. And that's why I've been, not always, but I've been more fascinated, especially in the last couple of decades with the public policy side of things. Let's go here. I mentioned this before we started. So when you're not doing this kind of work, I think it's important, for folks out there to understand that people in politics and public policy are real people and they spend time doing other things. When you're not doing this kind of work, how are you spending your time? I say this, I was going to do a podcast at one point called Outside Interests, which was focused entirely on this because I had a conversation with a Hill staffer who played bass in a band and somebody else who played blues harmonica and someone else was a photographer. And I think those are fascinating stories. So when you're not doing this, what are you up to?
Well, I have a 13-year-old son. And so as many of us who have children do, a lot of our outside time is spent enjoying their company. And he is really into tennis and into basketball. And so I spend a lot of time cheering for him. And going to his tennis matches, and he's often beautiful. I'm outside, go get a little exercise. Yes. And so we do a lot of that. And recently, since leaving Congress, because we had a lot of backlogged, we hadn't traveled. I wasn't able to travel, and there was COVID and things like that. So we've really been doing a lot of traveling, which is a lot of fun.
Any favorite trips so far?
Oh, we went to Japan. It was just so much fun. Have you been?
I've never been to Japan. I've been to Korea, and I've been to Indonesia, but never Japan.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's on the list. I want to go there too. But
let me add, Wales has become my new favorite place on earth. North Wales. I spent a couple of days there this spring, and it was magical. And I want to go back. And I find myself when I am trying to relax, going through videos of North Wales. But I've always wanted to go to Japan. Ever since I was a kid. So, Congresswoman, Dr. Bourdeaux, how do folks find out more about the good work you guys are doing at the Concord Coalition?
Okay. Well, please go to concordaction.org.
Yes.
There's a place you can sign up. You can get our newsletter. We promise not to overly bombard you with emails. We keep your email confidential. But it's a place we're sending out regular updates on what's going on in the budget. And it's also, we send out various action items you can take if you want to weigh in with your members of Congress to try to push them towards more fiscally responsible decision making.
Go and check that out. That's the Concord Coalition. You can find them online. Dr. Carolyn Bourdeaux, thank you so very much for joining us today.
Great to be here. Thank you.
This has been yet another episode of the Federal Newswire's Lunch Hour podcast. If you're watching us on our YouTube channel, go and check us out on one of the many fine podcast platforms that are out there. If you're listening to us, we love the fact that you can take us with you in that way. But to see what's happening in the studio, check out our YouTube channel. We now have a dedicated Lunch Hour YouTube channel, as well as our dedicated Lunch Hour Twitter handle at Lunch Hour Pod. Follow us there, subscribe, leave a like, check us out. All kinds of fun things that are going on there. I'm Andrew Langer. I'm your host. Thank you for joining us, and have a great rest of your lunch.
This has been the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour podcast, hosted by Andrew Langer. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream.